Like Khalistani elements, they have this narrative of a genocide which happened in Punjab during that period, and they quote figures of somewhere between 1 and 2.5 lakhs without obviously documenting for it, without any evidence in support of what they say. Jaswant Khalra, he arrived at a figure of 25,000 undocumented deaths, which itself is a very high number if you look at the numbers only. My question is, sir, what was the model and the methodology which led Khalra to this figure? Or it was just all hearsay sort of a thing?
First of all, let me go back to the figures you said. The Khalistanis float these ideas of 100,000 Sikhs were slaughtered. The same organization, the World Sikh Organization, in varying publications or submissions to the US Congress or other agencies, says 50,000 Sikhs were slaughtered, says 100,000 Sikhs were slaughtered, says 250,000 Sikhs were slaughtered. The same organization making different representations before different bodies has given completely arbitrary figures with a variation between 50,000 and 250,000. So you can come to your conclusion about their credibility and their methodology. Now let's come to Khalra. Khalra says there were in these 3 crematoria 2,097 bodies that were disposed of by the police. He comes to the conclusion that all these were people who had been murdered by the police in false encounters or in deaths in custody by torture or by whatever other. That they were executed by the police. And this was suppressed. Now, first of all, if the police is to dispose of bodies that they have done mischief with, they are hardly going to put down details in registers. Okay? Including details of firewood utilized for disposal of bodies, etc. Now, you will understand that these 3 districts of Majidha, these are police districts within the Amritsar administrative districts. Taran Taran, Majidha and Amritsar police district. These were the worst affected districts as far as terrorism was concerned between the period that this person covers. First of all, understand this is not in 1 year. This is an 11-year period over which he has documented 2,097 bodies disposed by the police. That is all he has documented, that bodies were disposed by the police over an 11-year period. This was the worst affected period. Dozens of bodies would be coming in which could not be identified. Migrants were being slaughtered by the terrorists. Terrorists were killing each other because there were multiple groups fighting each other for turf and for extortion and for whatever other benefits they were harvesting from the terrorist movement. Some people would also have been killed in perfectly legitimate encounters. After all, there were people on that side with guns killing people. So there must have been some engagement with policemen who had also carried guns. So there would be killed. Now, if you go to the NHRC decision on this case, they come to the conclusion that only 195 or 97, 195 of these cases were individuals who were in police custody at the time of death. Now we may jump immediately to the conclusion, so at least 195 people were murdered by the police. That is also incorrect. If you go through the data of police custodial deaths across India, they occur all the time. People are taken in vulnerable conditions with prior injuries, prior illnesses. They fall in custody. There is violence in custody between prisoners, which may result in death. So just because 195 people are killed in custody, die in custody, does not mean that they were killed in custody by the police, by the custodian. Then they said something like 1,300 of these 2,097 cases were of individuals who could be identified. And they were given some compensation, both the people in who died in custody and the people. But the NHRC does not say these were 1,300 people who were killed by the police and surreptitiously disposed of. It says that the police did not follow the entire procedure that has been laid down, which means carrying out of postmortems, inquests, the full formal process. Now, I can assure you that if you went across the country, at least in North India, where, let us say, policing is not quite at the level standards that it might be in some of the southern states, you will find that bodies that are disposed of by the police are seldom taken through the entire process laid down by law. So you will find deficiencies everywhere. And in a situation of near war, not near war, of a civil war, you would definitely find deficiencies. The NHRC did not make any imputation as to criminal culpability. It did not say these 1,300 people have been killed, so inquiries should be carried out. All it said was the procedure laid down was not followed in the disposal of these bodies. Therefore, compensation is given to the families. As far as Khalra's figure of 2097 is concerned, not to come to the 25,000 as yet, 2097 is concerned, not a single case has a illegal death been proved. That I can say without qualification. Did illegal deaths occur? Were there false encounters? I cannot say. What I am saying is that the data that Khalra is presenting and the way it is being interpreted across not only the Khalistani sympathizers, but the so-called human rights groupings, is completely irreconcilable with what is known, what the reality is. Now you come to the 25,000 figure. So he takes this 2097 figure and multiplies it with a number of other, or extrapolates it to other crematoria in Punjab and says, so 25,000 people were similarly illegally killed and cremated. Now this is when the primary figure is in question. This 25,000 makes no sense. Now I'll come to another thing. The disposal of unclaimed bodies is a basic function of the police. It is done everywhere. It was not something that the police started doing in Punjab. It is one of the duties of the police. If you take the data for Delhi, for instance, in 2011, more than 3,500 bodies were disposed of. In 2011, no high-intensity war going on over here. In Punjab itself, in 2011, we had 1,004 bodies disposed of by the police. 2011, no violence going on, no mass violence going on, no terrorism going on. Now, so your basic average would be about 1,000 bodies disposed of in peacetime in Punjab per year. This data is no longer being aggregated by the NCRB after 2016. Data is only available to 2015. So roughly about 1,000 deaths, 1,000 bodies are were being disposed of by the police in peacetime in Punjab. So that brings you to a figure of 11,000 anyways, in peacetime. Now take the situation in Punjab that prevailed between 1984 and 1994.
True.
Thousands and thousands of people were being killed, thousands per year. In the worst year, we had more than 5,000 fatalities.
True.
Not all these bodies could have been identified. The police would probably not have too much of an inclination to identify that act of negligence will certainly be there. There were other more pressing issues at hand, life and death issues, and a dead body is a dead body. Callous, indifferent, all that can be conceded. But even this 25,000 figure, it has subsequently other human rights organizations have tried to validate it. They have never come above a figure of about 8,000. Now I'll tell you, these three police districts of Amritsar accounted for roughly 27% of total fatalities in those 84-94 period. Now, if you take that as a proportion of bodies that would be, the remaining 73% would be something like 7,500 odd bodies. You can do the calculations. So it would be natural to expect something like 7,000 or 8,000 bodies to be disposed of by the police as unidentified.
True.
If the figure for these three districts is correct. So none of this is in the discourse. One or two people have tried to point out the actual situation, point out the processes and procedures, point out that the police disposes of unidentified bodies everywhere in this country and perhaps everywhere in the world. That even according to the NHRC's observations, some of the bodies bore bullet wounds. So none of this is reflected not only in SUTLUJ, but in the entire discourse on the subject. You know, there was a very good friend of mine who once said, there is a competition between human rights organizations that my genocide is bigger than your genocide. Because unless you have these inflated figures, nobody is going to attend to you. Unless you say 250,000 Sikhs were slaughtered, nobody is going to bother with what you are saying. So there is an inbuilt motivation to exaggerate fatalities, to use words like genocide and use words like, targeting of our community as a whole, efforts to wipe out a community. So this is language that is intended to and very successfully has been used to attract attention. And falsehood is at the core of these efforts.